"I'm not attracted to you anymore," my husband said to me as I was plating his favorite dinner, my hands trembling with arthritis. A week later, I saw him begging at my doorstep for the $8 million he thought was his. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if for a second this sounds familiar to you, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening myself. It was a Tuesday in October in New York City, and the smell of roasted nuts from a street vendor drifted up to our fourth-floor window. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing a beef Wellington, the dish I had cooked for every anniversary for the last 38 years. My fingers, swollen from the damp autumn air, struggled with the apron that no longer fit me as it once did. The blue silk Mark had given me on our 10th anniversary now hung loosely over my stooped shoulders. The table was set with the embroidered linen tablecloth I inherited from my mother, the sterling silver we had received as a wedding gift, and the Waterford crystal glasses I only brought out for special occasions. The warm light from the dining room lamp created that intimate atmosphere I loved so much, that sense of home I had cultivated for decades with small details and a lot of love. Mark arrived at 9:15, as always. His heavy footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor of the hallway, and I heard the metallic clatter of his keys dropping onto the console table. There was no "I'm home," like in the old days, nor the kiss on the cheek I used to wait for by the door during the first years of our marriage. Only silence and the creak of his leather shoes against the floor. He sat in his usual spot, the side of the table from where he could see the television in the living room, even though I had put on soft classical music, the kind that used to relax him after his long days at the law firm. His eyes, once warm and brown, now looked at me with a coldness that cut through me like the icy wind seeping through the cracks of the old windows. "Emily," he said my name as if it were an annoyance in his mouth. Not "my love" or "honey," as he had called me for so many years I'd lost count. I approached with the steaming platter, smiling with that automatic smile I had perfected to hide when something hurt me inside. I was wearing my cream silk blouse, the one he had told me made me look elegant, and I had put on a little makeup, applying blush to my cheeks as my mother taught me. A woman must always look her best for her husband, Emily. It's our job to keep the flame alive. But Mark didn't even look at me as I served him. His eyes were fixed on his cell phone, that device that in recent months had begun to command more of his attention than I did. Every now and then, a small smile would play on his lips, but it wasn't for me. It was never for me. "How was your day at the firm?" I asked, trying to start a conversation like we used to, back when we still shared the small victories and defeats of our days. He barely looked up as if my voice were an annoying background noise. "Fine," he replied curtly, returning to his phone. The silence stretched between us like an oil slick. I ate slowly, savoring every bite of a dish I had prepared with such care, while he devoured his portion without looking up, as if it were fuel instead of a dinner made with love. That's when the landline rang, a call that would change everything. "The Morrison residence," I answered with the politeness instilled in me since childhood. "Emily, it's Carol, from the bank." Our financial advisor's voice sounded tense, worried. "I need to speak with you urgently about your inheritance trust. There have been some irregularities." My heart stopped. The trust my father had established before he died, the $8 million that had been my safety net, my peace of mind, my freedom. Mark, who had been pretending not to listen, suddenly lifted his head like a predator that had smelled blood. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked, feeling my throat go dry. "Someone has been trying to access the funds, with documents that look legitimate, but—" "Emily, have you authorized any transfers? Have you signed anything recently?" I looked at Mark. His eyes were no longer on his phone. He was watching me with an intensity I hadn't seen in years. But it wasn't love. It was something much darker. "No," I whispered. "I haven't signed anything." After hanging up, I stood by the phone, my hands shaking. Mark continued eating his dinner as if nothing had happened. But there was something different in the air, an electric tension that made my skin crawl. "Emily," he finally said, without looking up from his plate. His voice had a tone I had never heard before, cold and calculating. "Sit down." I obeyed as I had for so many years. I sat in my place, across from him, the elegantly set table between us suddenly feeling like a chasm. He set his fork down on the plate, wiped his mouth with the linen napkin I had ironed that morning, and looked me directly in the eyes for the first time in months. "I'm not attracted to you anymore, Emily." The words fell on me like stones. Cold, heavy, devastating. "Looking at you just makes me feel sorry for you. You're not the woman you used to be. You've let yourself go. I'm not interested in you anymore. I don't desire you." Every word was a dagger twisting deeper. My breathing became shallow, and it felt as if the air in the room had become too thick for my lungs. "You've gained weight," he continued with a cruelty that seemed to come from a stranger wearing my husband's face. "Your skin is wrinkled. Your breasts are sagging. When I see you in your nightgown at night, I feel repulsed." Tears began to stream down my cheeks, but I made no sound. 38 years of marriage had taught me to cry in silence, to swallow the pain so as not to bother, not to be dramatic, not to be a burden. "That's why," he said, standing up and smoothing down the shirt I had ironed that morning. "I need space, air, freedom to find what truly makes me happy." He walked towards the dining room door, but stopped, turning to look at me one last time. "Oh, and Emily," he added with a smile that chilled me to the bone, "we're going to have to talk about certain financial reorganizations. It's time we both had access to all our resources, for the sake of our future." I heard him go up the stairs to our bedroom, the creak of the bed as he lay down. And then, silence. I was left alone in the dining room, surrounded by the remnants of a dinner I had prepared with love for a man who had just destroyed my soul. The candles I had lit were still burning, casting dancing shadows on the walls that now seemed to mock me. The smell of the beef Wellington, which had once filled me with pride, now made me nauseous. My hands trembled as I cleared the plates, one by one, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in a world that had just become completely unrecognizable. At the sink, as the hot water ran over the fine china, I finally allowed myself to sob. But something else was growing in my chest, alongside the pain. A small flame of suspicion was beginning to burn. Carol's words echoed in my mind. Irregularities, documents that look legitimate. That night, while Mark snored in our marital bed, I stayed awake on the living room sofa, staring at the ceiling and wondering how long he had been planning this. How long I had been living with a stranger wearing the face of the man who once loved me. I didn't know that in 1 week, I would see him kneeling at my door, begging for my forgiveness, and for the $8 million he believed belonged to him. I didn't know that everything that was about to happen would make me stronger than I ever imagined I could be. The following days were a thick fog of memories crowding my mind like ghosts demanding justice. While Mark packed his bags with the ease of someone packing for a vacation, I stood motionless in the kitchen, reliving every moment I had put his well-being above my own. I remembered that Christmas in 1995, when his sister Pamela was going through a bitter divorce. Mark came home with teary eyes and said, "Emily, honey, Pamela has nowhere to spend the holidays with the kids. Could we lend her the money for the Hawaii trip? Just this once." I had saved dollar by dollar for 8 months, stashing the money in a cookie tin hidden behind the spice jars. I dreamed of walking on the beaches of Maui, feeling the sand between my toes, seeing Mark relaxed under the Pacific sun. But I handed him the money without blinking. "Of course, darling. Family comes first." Pamela never paid us back, and we never went to Hawaii. Then came his cousin Alex's business venture in 2001. "Emily, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Alex is starting a tech company, and if we invest now, we'll be loaded in 5 years." I had just inherited the small sum my Aunt Rose had left specifically for me in her will, $50,000 that I could have used for the art restoration course I'd always wanted to take, or to renovate the kitchen that was falling apart. But Mark convinced me with that smile of his that melted me, with those logical arguments that made my dreams seem like selfish whims. The company went bankrupt in 6 months. Alex moved to Florida to start over. We were left with the debt. I got up from the sofa where I had spent another sleepless night and walked to the hall closet, where we kept the boxes of important documents. My fingers trembled as I opened the one containing the bank statements from the last 20 years. Each statement was a stab of memory. 2003. "Emily, I need you to co-sign the loan for the new office space. It's just a formality, love. With my income, there's no risk. I put up my house, the house I had inherited from my parents, as collateral. When the firm wasn't as prosperous as he'd hoped, it was my savings that paid the installments for 2 years. 2007. Honey, Mom needs a private operation. You know how the healthcare system is. We can't let her suffer on a waiting list. His mother, Eleanor, who had never said a kind word to me in 15 years of marriage, who criticized everything from my cooking to the way I dressed. I emptied my savings account to pay for her hip replacement. She recovered perfectly and lived for another 10 years. She never thanked me. 2012. Emily, I have an incredible opportunity to buy some stock. My partner has inside information. I sold my grandmother's jewelry, the pieces I had promised to keep for the daughter we never had. The pearl earrings my grandmother wore on her wedding day. The gold brooch that had belonged to 4 generations of women in my family. All sold to buy shares in a company that collapsed 3 months later. But it wasn't just money. It was also time, energy, pieces of my soul given without reservation. For 20 years, every Sunday after church, we went to his parents' house for family lunch. I would arrive loaded with a huge homemade lasagna, apple pie that took me hours to prepare. I would stay in the kitchen washing dishes while he enjoyed cocktails with his father and brothers in the living room. His mother would give me orders as if I were her maid. Emily, warm up the coffee. Emily, these glasses aren't washed properly. Emily, next time use less salt in the sauce. When Mark got sick with kidney stones in 2015, I took 2 weeks off work to care for him. I woke up every 2 hours at night to give him his medication, made him special teas I had learned from my mother, and massaged his back when the pain was unbearable. The day he was discharged, he went straight to the golf course with his friends to celebrate his recovery. I stayed home, washing the sweat-soaked sheets and collecting medicine cups from all over the house. When he lost his job in 2018, I worked double shifts at the flower shop to keep us afloat. My hands were covered in cuts from rose thorns. My feet swelled from standing for 12 hours a day, but I never complained. It's temporary, Emily. As soon as something better comes along, everything will go back to normal. It took him 8 months to find another job, and when he did, he bought himself a new suit to celebrate. I was still wearing the same old clothes. The memories piled up, one after another, like a flood of pain threatening to drown me. Every sacrifice I had made, thinking I was investing in our future, in our love, in that quiet old age we planned together on winter nights, curled up on the sofa watching old movies. Mark came downstairs dragging his large suitcase, the one I had given him for our 20th anniversary when we still dreamed of traveling through Europe together. The sound of the wheels on the hardwood floor echoed through the house like a death sentence. Emily, he said without looking me in the eye, adjusting his tie in the hall mirror. I'll be at my brother Charles's place for a while. I need to clear my head, think about what I really want out of life. He approached me, and for a moment, my treacherous heart sped up, thinking he would give me a farewell kiss, a sign of affection to soften the pain of his departure. But he only held out his hand. "Give me the keys to the Mercedes," he said matter-of-factly, like someone asking for the salt at dinner. The Mercedes, the car I had paid for with the inheritance from my uncle Fernando, my father's brother who had worked his whole life as a construction worker and saved every penny to leave something for his nieces and nephews. Mark had insisted the car be in his name for insurance purposes, but it was my money that paid for it. "The keys?" I repeated, not understanding. "Emily, don't be difficult. I'm the one who uses it for work. You can take the subway or the bus. It's more practical this way." With trembling hands, I went to the hall table and took the keys from the heart-shaped keychain he had given me the day we bought the car. I handed them to him without a word, watching as he pocketed them with the same indifference someone pockets a receipt. "Oh, and Emily," he added, turning to me from the door, "I'm going to need you to sign some papers. Legal documents that will allow us to better manage our finances while we're temporarily separated. My lawyer will send them to you in a few days." The door closed behind him with a soft click that rang in my ears like a gunshot. I stood in the hall, looking at the mirror where he had fixed his tie, seeing my reflection, a 63-year-old woman with graying hair in a messy bun, dressed in a worn-out house robe, her eyes swollen from crying. When had I stopped seeing myself in that mirror? When had I become invisible, even to myself? That night, as I prepared dinner for the first time in almost 4 decades, I found an old postcard in a kitchen drawer. It was of Paris, a picture of the Eiffel Tower lit up against the night sky. I had bought it in 1985, when I still dreamed that Mark and I would travel through Europe for our belated honeymoon. "Someday we'll go, Emily," he had promised as I stuck the postcard on the refrigerator door. When things calm down, things never calm down. There was always a family crisis, a business opportunity, an emergency that required us to postpone our dreams. I took the postcard in my fingers, feeling how the edges had softened over time, and something broke inside my chest. Not my heart. That was already in pieces. It was something deeper, more primal. It was the rope that had kept me tied to a life that had stopped belonging to me years ago. For the first time in decades, I started to wonder what would have happened if I had said no, just once. If I had kept the money for Hawaii. If I had taken the art restoration course. If I had traveled to Paris alone, even for just a weekend. But those questions were coming too late, weren't they? Or maybe not. Maybe it was never too late to start living for yourself. Loneliness has a particular sound when you reach your 60s. It's the echo of your own footsteps in a house that was once full of life, the silence of a phone that no longer rings with invitations, the murmur of the television as your only companion during dinners that used to be conversations. The first few days after Mark left were the hardest. I would wake up at 6 in the morning out of habit, with the automatic impulse to make the strong coffee he liked before his shower. My feet would carry me to the kitchen before my mind remembered there was no one else but me in this house that suddenly seemed gigantic. On Wednesday, my neighbor Rosemary knocked on the door. I had known her for 15 years. We shared a landing and occasionally crossed paths in the elevator, exchanging pleasantries about the weather or the city's roadwork. But that morning, she had that mix of curiosity and pity in her eyes that I dreaded. "Emily, dear," she said, holding a tray covered with a dish towel, "I made some lemon poppy seed muffins and thought you could use a little company." She stayed in my living room for 2 hours, and though I appreciated the gesture, every word out of her mouth was a stab disguised as concern. "Oh, Emily, you're so brave, being all alone at your age. I wouldn't know what to do without my Fernando." A dramatic pause while she sipped her tea. "Although, come to think of it, men sometimes need adventures. It's natural. My friend Amparo says it's better to let them get it out of their system than to have them bitter at home." Every word was like acid on an open wound. She went on about how understandable Mark's situation was, how difficult it must be for him to feel trapped, how important it was for a wife to know when to give space. "Of course, you've always been very, how should I put it, domestic, very dedicated to the house. Some men need more stimulation, more intellectual conversation, you know?" When she finally left, I sat on the same armchair she had, feeling her words linger in the air like toxic smoke. Was it true? Was I so boring, so unstimulating, that I had pushed my own husband into another's arms? On Thursday, my sister-in-law Patricia, the wife of Mark's younger brother Charles, arrived. She entered my house with the attitude of someone fulfilling an unpleasant but necessary family duty. "Emily, I'm here to speak to you on behalf of the family," she announced, perching on the edge of the sofa as if my house were contaminated. "We think you might be being a little dramatic about all this." She was wearing more makeup than usual, a new dress I recognized from the windows at Saks, and her perfectly manicured nails flashed as she gestured with rehearsed expressions. "Mark is going through a midlife crisis. It's normal. All men have them. What he needs is understanding, not pressure." She paused, as if giving me time to absorb her wisdom. "Besides, Emily, let's be realistic. You're 63. What are you going to do alone? Where are you going to go?" Her words pierced my chest like pins. She continued, relentless. "Men are like big children, Emily. They need to be pampered, made to feel special. And lately, well, I don't know if you've looked in a mirror, but maybe you could make an effort. Fix yourself up a bit more. Make yourself prettier for him when he comes back." When she left, I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror through Patricia's eyes. I saw the wrinkles that had deepened around my eyes, the double chin that had formed without my noticing, the hair that had lost the shine of my youth. I saw a woman who had aged taking care of others, who had put so much effort into keeping the house perfect that she had forgotten to maintain herself. Was it my fault? Had I been so negligent with myself that I had given Mark reasons to look for something better? On Friday, while organizing the papers I had taken from the closet, I found something that made my blood run cold. Among the bank statements was one I didn't remember seeing before, dated just 2 months ago. It was from an account I didn't know existed, a joint account in Mark's name and mine, with a balance of $700,000. $700,000 I didn't remember depositing. With trembling hands, I dialed the bank. After being transferred 3 times, I finally spoke to Carol, our longtime advisor. "Emily, thank God you called." Her voice sounded relieved but tense. "We need to meet immediately. There are things you need to know about your trust account." An hour later, I was sitting across from Carol's desk in an office that smelled of stale coffee and photocopies. The documents were spread out before me like evidence of a crime I didn't understand. "Emily, your husband has been moving funds from your trust account into joint accounts that he controls. Technically, since you're in a community property state, he's entitled to do so, but—" Carol paused, clearly uncomfortable. "There's something else." She opened a folder and pulled out a photograph. It was Mark, but not the Mark I knew. He was in an elegant restaurant, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, his arm around a woman who looked half his age. She was blonde, slender, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She was looking at him with adoration, the way I used to look at him decades ago. "A colleague of mine saw them at Daniel," Carol explained gently. "It's a very expensive restaurant, Emily. The kind of place where dinner for 2 can cost $1,000. $1,000. More than I spent on food in 2 months. Money that was technically mine, from my inheritance, being squandered on a woman who could be his daughter. There's more," Carol continued, pulling out more documents. "He's been buying jewelry, expensive clothes. He's even rented an apartment in Soho. All paid for with funds from your trust." The figures danced before my eyes. $15,000 in jewelry from Tiffany's, $8,000 in designer clothes, $4,500 in monthly rent for an apartment I'd never seen. All while I was counting pennies to buy the cheapest fish at the market. "How much is left?" I asked, my voice breaking. Carol consulted her papers, clearly reluctant to give me the answer. "From the original $8 million trust, there's about $2.5 million left. $5.5 million gone. $5.5 million that had been my security, my peace of mind, my future, turned into a new life for my husband, with a woman who didn't even know I existed. I stood up from the chair, feeling the floor move beneath me. Carol handed me a glass of water, but my hands were shaking so much I could barely hold it. "Emily, there are legal ways to protect what's left," she said urgently, "but you have to act fast. Every day that passes, he can keep transferring more money." I left the bank in a state of shock. The streets of New York seemed unreal, as if I were walking through a dream. People passed by, talking, laughing, living their normal lives, while my world was completely disintegrating. That night, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea cooling in my hands, I understood the full extent of my naivety. For months, while I blamed myself for not being attractive enough, interesting enough, good enough for him, Mark had been meticulously planning my financial ruin. Every "I love you" had been a lie. Every "I need space to think" had been a smokescreen. Every "couples problems are solved with patience" had been a manipulation to keep me still while he systematically plundered my inheritance. I took my cup of chamomile, and on an impulse I couldn't control, I smashed it against the kitchen wall. The sound of shattering porcelain echoed through the house, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was something far more dangerous. It was the smile of a woman who had just realized she had been betrayed by the man she trusted most in the world, and that she now had nothing left to lose. The next day, for the first time in my life, I was going to stop being the silent, patient victim I had been for 63 years. It was time for Emily to learn how to fight back. On Monday morning, I made a decision that terrified me as much as it liberated me. I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Monica Hayes, a woman I had seen on the news defending cases of financial abuse against older women. If Mark could play dirty, I could learn the rules of the game too. But before that appointment, I had to do something I had been putting off since Friday: freeze every account I could control. At 9 sharp, I was at the bank, not as the confused, submissive wife from the week before, but as the rightful owner of an estate that was being plundered. Carol greeted me with a mix of relief and concern. "Emily, I'm so glad you decided to act quickly," she said as she prepared the necessary documents. "Every hour counts in these cases." I signed every paper that blocked Mark's access to what was left of my trust. I changed the passwords on the accounts. I revoked every authorization I had signed over the years without fully reading. For the first time in decades, my money was solely under my control. I left the bank feeling strangely light, as if I had dropped a weight I didn't know I was carrying. But that feeling of freedom lasted exactly 3 hours. At 12:30, my phone began to ring with the insistence of a fire alarm. "Emily, what the hell did you do?" Mark's voice sounded different, desperate, furious in a way I hadn't heard in our 38 years of marriage. "Why can't I access our accounts?" "Because they're not our accounts anymore, Mark," I replied with a calmness that surprised me. "They're my accounts, from my inheritance, which you've been stealing to spend on your girlfriend." There was a silence so long I thought he had hung up. When he spoke again, his voice had a tone that sent a chill down my spine. "Emily, you don't know what you're doing. This is a marriage. We share everything. If you continue with this madness, the consequences will be terrible. For you." "Are you threatening me, Mark?" "I'm warning you. Unblock those accounts before you live to regret it." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking, but not from fear. It was something like adrenaline, as if after years of being asleep, my body had finally remembered how to feel alive. An hour later, Charles, Mark's brother, arrived with Patricia. They hadn't come for a visit. They had come on a family rescue mission. Charles sat on my sofa as if he owned it, with that attitude of a man used to women obeying his advice without question. Patricia remained standing, pacing my living room like a general inspecting a battlefield. "Emily, this has gotten out of hand," Charles began, in the patronizing tone he used to explain complicated things to the women in the family. "Mark is a wreck. He says you've gone crazy, that you're acting irrationally." "Irrational?" I repeated, the word burning in my throat. "Is it irrational to protect my own inheritance from a thief?" Patricia stopped dead in her tracks, turning to me with a shocked expression. "How can you call your own husband a thief? Emily, this is a disgrace to the whole family. Marriages have their ups and downs, but this is a betrayal." "A betrayal?" I stood up from the armchair, feeling rage rise in my chest like hot lava. "I'm the one who betrayed him. Me, who has taken care of this man for nearly 4 decades while he spends my inheritance on whores." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Charles and Patricia exchanged glances, as if witnessing the apocalypse. "Emily," Charles sighed, "I understand you're hurt, but you solve marital problems by talking, not by destroying the family finances. Mark needs those accounts for his expenses, to maintain his job, to maintain his mistress?" I interrupted. "To rent luxury apartments? To buy jewelry he never gave to me?" Patricia approached me with a condescending look, as if speaking to a child who doesn't understand the rules of the adult world. "Oh, Emily, all women our age go through this. Men have crises. They need to feel desired. They need adventures. But in the end, they always come home. You just need to have patience and understanding." "Patience?" I repeated, feeling something definitively snap inside me. "Patience while he steals $5.5 million from me? Understanding while he publicly humiliates me with a woman who could be his daughter?" Charles stood up, clearly uncomfortable with where the conversation was going. "Emily, I think you're exaggerating the amounts. Besides, technically, since you're in a community property state—" "Technically bullshit," I exploded, using a word I hadn't said aloud in my entire life. That was my inheritance. The money my father saved by working like an animal to secure my future. Patricia recoiled as if I had slapped her. They had never seen me lose my temper, never heard me raise my voice, let alone use swear words. Emily, the perfect wife, the quiet, compliant woman, had just shown her teeth. "I don't recognize you," Patricia mumbled. "This isn't you, Emily." "You're right," I answered, feeling a strange sense of power coursing through my veins. "This isn't me. This is me defending myself for the first time in my life." Charles tried one last tactic, the one he probably used in his business dealings when things got tough. "Emily, think about it. If you continue down this path, you'll end up alone. Completely alone. Without Mark, without family, without anyone to take care of you when you're an old woman. Is that what you want?" His words should have terrified me. For decades, the fear of loneliness had been my invisible prison, the chain that kept me tied to situations that hurt me. But now, looking at Charles in his expensive suit and his air of moral superiority, I just felt a strange calm. "You know what, Charles?" I said, walking towards the front door of my apartment. "I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people who steal from me, lie to me, and tell me I should be grateful for it." I opened the door and waited. Patricia looked at me with a mixture of horror and contempt. "You're going to regret this, Emily. When Mark divorces you and you're left with nothing, you're going to regret it." "Maybe so," I replied, "but at least I'll regret it as the owner of my own life." They left without saying goodbye, and I closed the door behind them with more satisfaction than I had felt in years. That afternoon, my phone didn't stop ringing. Calls from Mark's mother, his sisters, distant cousins who were suddenly very concerned about the well-being of our marriage, all with the same message. Emily was being selfish, irrational, destructive. Not one of them asked how I felt. Not one questioned why Mark had been stealing my inheritance. Not one seemed to consider that maybe, just maybe, a 63-year-old woman had the right to decide what to do with her own money. At 8 o'clock, when the phone rang for the 20th time, I decided to unplug it. I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine Mark kept for special occasions that never seemed to arrive when I was present, and sat in my favorite armchair. For the first time in weeks, the apartment didn't feel empty. It felt mine, but I knew this was just the beginning. Mark wasn't going to give up so easily, and neither was the family. They had too much to lose if I truly broke free from their control. However, there was something they didn't know. After 63 years of silence, Emily had found her voice, and she had no intention of being quiet ever again. The war had just begun, and for the first time in my life, I had the weapons. On Tuesday morning, I woke up at 10:30, not at 6, as I had religiously done for 4 decades to make Mark's breakfast, not at 7, to iron his shirt while he showered, at 10:30, because my body had decided for itself when it needed to rest. I stayed in bed for a few more minutes, feeling the strange freedom of not having to immediately jump up to meet someone else's needs. Sunlight filtered through the curtains I had forgotten to fully close the night before, creating golden patterns on the hardwood floor that I'd never had time to notice before. For the first time in years, I wondered what I wanted for breakfast. Not what Mark liked to find on the table, not what was quickest to prepare, not what was left in the fridge after satisfying his preferences. What did Emily want for breakfast? The answer surprised me. French toast with honey and strawberries. A treat I had stopped allowing myself because Mark considered sweet breakfasts kid stuff and preferred his black coffee with whole wheat toast and ham. As I whisked the eggs with milk and cinnamon, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had cooked something just because I felt like it. Every meal for the past several years had been planned around Mark's tastes, his work schedule, his digestive issues that came and went at his convenience. The smell of butter melting in the skillet filled the kitchen with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the scent of freedom, sweet and intoxicating like the first sip of wine after years of forced abstinence. I sat down to eat in Mark's spot, at the head of the table where you could see the building's inner courtyard. For years I had sat on the side, where the view was just the brick wall of the neighboring building, because he needed a wide perspective to start the day right. Now I understood why. From here you could see the rose bushes the co-op had planted in the spring, the sparrows building their nests on the ledges, the life that continued its natural course without asking anyone's permission. After breakfast, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I just sat at the table, in no rush to clear the dishes, without the urge to immediately start the household chores that had structured my life like religious dogma. At 11:30, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman with her hair in a ponytail and a leather briefcase in her hand. "Mrs. Emily Morrison?" she asked when I opened the door. "I'm Monica Hayes, the lawyer you hired yesterday." Monica Hayes was nothing like I had imagined. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of experience in battles I was just beginning to fight. She moved with the confidence of a woman who had learned to navigate a world designed to silence her. "Mrs. Morrison," she said as she spread her documents on my dining table, "I've reviewed your case, and I have good news and bad news. The good news is that we can legally protect what's left of your estate. The bad news is that recovering what's already been spent will be more complicated." She explained the legal details with a patience I didn't expect from someone so young. Bank transfers that could be traced, purchases that could be documented, accounts that could be frozen. For the first time in weeks, I felt I had a real ally, someone who saw my situation as a problem with a solution rather than a family drama to be endured in silence. "There's something else you should know," Monica added, pulling out a different folder. "We did some more digging, and it turns out your husband has been living a more elaborate double life than we thought." The photographs she showed me were like stabs to the gut. Mark in different restaurants with different women, not just the young blonde from the Banks photo, but also a middle-aged brunette, a redhead who looked foreign, even a girl who couldn't have been more than 25. "We believe he has been maintaining simultaneous relationships with at least 4 different women," Monica explained with professional delicacy. "All financed with your money. 4 women. 4 parallel lives he had been funding without my knowledge while I was counting pennies to buy the cheapest fish at the market." "How is that possible?" I whispered, though the question was more for myself than for her. "Men like your husband are experts at compartmentalizing," Monica replied. "He probably told each of them a different story. He told you he needed space to think. He probably told them he was getting a divorce, that you were a cold, distant wife who didn't understand him." Every word was a painful revelation, but also strangely liberating. It hadn't been my fault. It wasn't my lack of attractiveness, my boredom, my inadequacy as a wife. I had been the victim of an emotional predator who had turned deceit into an art form. "What can I do?" I asked. "Legally, we can begin divorce and asset recovery proceedings. Emotionally," Monica paused, studying my face. "That's up to you. But I'll tell you something I've learned in 15 years of defending women like you. The sweetest revenge is a life well lived." After Monica left, I sat in my living room surrounded by legal documents and photographs that proved the extent of Mark's betrayal. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt strangely relieved. For the first time in months, everything made sense. His lack of sexual interest wasn't because I was unattractive. He was spending his energy on 4 different women. His constant irritability wasn't because of work problems. It was the stress of maintaining multiple lies. His need for space wasn't a midlife crisis. It was the logistics of a criminal life. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the mall alone, without a shopping list dictated by Mark's needs, without rushing to get home to make his dinner. I walked slowly through the aisles, stopping at shop windows I used to only glance at. I went into a bookstore and bought 3 novels I had wanted to read, but that Mark considered a waste of time. I sat in a cafe and ordered a latte and a piece of chocolate cake, not worrying about calories or being late. I watched the young couples holding hands, the mothers with their children, the single women like me who seemed perfectly comfortable in their own company. When had I stopped feeling whole on my own? When had I started defining my worth by how useful I was to someone else? On the way home, I passed by the flower shop where I had worked during the months Mark was unemployed. Carmen, the owner, saw me through the window and came out to greet me. "Emily, so good to see you. How have you been? I haven't heard from you in ages." For a moment, I considered giving her the automatic response I had perfected over decades. "Fine, thanks. Everything's normal." But something in her genuine smile made me change my mind. Honestly, Carmen, I'm going through a very difficult divorce. But for the first time in years, I think I'm okay. Carmen invited me in and made me a cup of tea while she told me about the shop, about her new projects, about how much she had missed my help during the busy seasons. Emily, she said before I left, if you ever want to come back to work here even just a few hours a week, I'd love to have you back. You were always the most dedicated employee I ever had. I walked home with a feeling I hadn't experienced in decades. The possibility of a future that depended solely on my own decisions. I didn't have to consult anyone if I wanted to work at the flower shop. I didn't have to negotiate schedules based on Mark's needs. I didn't have to justify why I wanted to spend my time on something that made me happy. That night, for the first time since Mark had left, I didn't cry. I didn't check my phone for his calls or texts. I didn't lie awake wondering what I had done wrong. Instead, I took a long bath with scented salts I had bought years ago, but never used because Mark complained about the smell. I put on my most comfortable nightgown, not the one he considered sexy, but the soft cotton one that felt like a hug. I got into bed with one of my new novels and read until my eyes closed naturally. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. No startling awake at a noise from Mark coming home late. No insomnia from worrying about his mood the next day. No nightmares about the uncertain future of our marriage. I woke up feeling rested, renewed, as if I had recovered a part of myself that had been lost for so long I couldn't even remember what it felt like to be whole. Emily was beginning to remember who she was before she became Mark's wife, and she liked what she was discovering. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after I had blocked the accounts, Mark appeared at my door. He didn't ring the bell like a civilized visitor. He pounded on the door with his fists like a desperate man, shouting my name in a voice I didn't recognize. "Emily! Open this damn door! We need to talk!" I peeked through the peephole, and what I saw took my breath away. The impeccably dressed man I had known for nearly 4 decades had transformed into a pathetic shadow of himself. His hair, always perfectly styled with gel, hung greasy on his forehead. His shirt, wrinkled and stained, looked like it had been slept in. His eyes had the wild look of someone who has lost control of his own life. "I know you're in there, Emily. Your neighbor told me you haven't left all day." Rosemary. Of course it had been Rosemary, always so eager to stick her nose in other people's business, especially when it could cause drama. I took a deep breath and opened the door, but I kept the security chain on. Not out of physical fear, but because something about his appearance warned me that the Mark I knew had completely disappeared. "What do you want?" I asked through the crack. "What do I want?" His voice broke into a hysterical laugh. "I want you to stop making a fool of yourself. I want you to unblock those damn accounts. I want you to stop acting like a vengeful lunatic." "Lower your voice, or I'm closing the door," I said with a calmness that surprised me. "The neighbors don't need to hear you shouting." He ran his hands through his hair, making it even more disheveled. "Emily, please. You don't know what you've done. You have no idea the problems you've caused." "Problems?" I repeated. "You mean the problem that you can no longer support 4 women with my money?" His face fell as if I'd slapped him. "4 women? What are you talking about?" "Emily, I think you need medical help. You're delusional." I went to the dining room table and grabbed the folder Monica had left with the photographs. I went back to the door and showed them to him one by one through the crack. "Christina, 24 art student. Apartment in Soho you pay for. $2,800 a month." I showed the first photo. "Isabella, 32, divorced, 2 kids. You give her $500 a week for expenses." Second photo. "Natalie, 28, freelance model. Jewelry from Tiffany's worth $15,000. Third photo. "And Amber, 41, your official girlfriend. The one you bought a new car for last month." With each photo I showed, Mark seemed to shrink a little more, like a balloon slowly losing air. "Emily, I can explain." "No," I interrupted. "I don't want any more explanations. I don't want any more lies. I don't want any more empty promises." He slumped against the hallway wall, and for a moment it looked like he was going to cry. "Emily, please. Without that money, I can't maintain my life. You can't do this to me." "Your life?" The disbelief made me raise my voice. Your life? The life you built by stealing from me? It's not stealing. We're husband and wife. What's yours is mine. What was mine no longer exists, Mark. What is mine now is protected from you. At that moment, Charles and Patricia appeared at the end of the hall. They had come prepared for a full-blown family intervention. Behind them came Eleanor, Mark's mother, leaning on her cane with an expression of tragic drama. Emily, look what you've done, Patricia began before even reaching my door. Look what you've done to your husband. Look what you've done to this family. Eleanor limped dramatically closer. Emily, my child, she said in the trembling voice she reserved for her most effective performances. My son is suffering. His nerves are shot because of you. Is this what you want? To destroy the family? I closed the door, unlatched the security chain, and opened it all the way. I didn't need to protect myself anymore. I wasn't afraid. Come in, I said. All of you, come in, because we are only having this conversation once, and in front of everyone. They settled in my living room like an inquisition, with Mark in the center looking smaller than ever, flanked by his family who looked at him with a mixture of pity and reproach. All right, I said, remaining standing before them all. Let's be clear. Mark has stolen $5.5 million of my inheritance to support 4 simultaneous mistresses. Did you know that? The silence that followed was so thick you could have sliced it with a pair of scissors. Emily, marriages go through crises, Charles began. Crises? I cut him off. You call theft a crisis? You call emotional bigamy a crisis? You call 38 years of deceit a crisis? Eleanor banged her cane on the floor. You don't air your dirty laundry in public. You don't broadcast it to lawyers and banks. You have dishonored this family. Something broke inside me when I heard those words. Not my heart, which had been broken for a long time. The last chain that tied me to the need for these people's approval broke. I dishonored the family? I asked, feeling laughter rise in my throat like boiling lava. I dishonored the family? I walked over to the cabinet where I kept our family albums and took out the oldest one. I opened it to the first page, where our wedding photo was. This woman, I said, pointing to my young face in the photograph, worked for 20 years to pay off your son's debts. This woman sold her grandmother's jewelry to save your brother's business. This woman took care of your mother during her surgery without so much as a thank you. I turned the pages slowly, showing photo after photo of family celebrations where I always appeared in the background, serving, cleaning, caregiving. This woman, I continued, gave up her career, her dreams, her identity, to become what you all needed her to be. And now it turns out I'm the one who dishonors the family for refusing to be robbed any longer. Mark tried to get up from the sofa. Emily, please, stop. You're making a scene. No! I shouted with a force I didn't know I possessed. Sit down and listen. For 38 years I have listened to your excuses, your demands, your criticisms. Now it's my turn to speak. Silence fell over the room again, but this time it was different. It was the silence of shock, of people who had never seen Emily without her mask of submission. Mark, I said, looking him directly in the eye. I signed the divorce papers this morning. Monica will file them on Monday. You will get what you are legally entitled to, half of what we built together. But my inheritance, what my parents left me, you will never touch that again. His face crumpled. Emily, you can't leave me like this. With nothing. I'm not leaving you with nothing. I'm leaving you with exactly what you brought to this marriage. Your job, your intelligence, and your ability to manipulate people. Use them to support yourself, not to steal from me. I turned to Patricia. And you, Patricia, who have criticized me so much for not knowing how to keep my husband. You can now advise your brother-in-law on how to support 4 women on his own salary. I'm sure you have very creative ideas. Patricia flushed beet red. Finally, I turned to Eleanor. And you, madam, who have spoken so much of family honor, you can explain to your friends at the Bridge Club how your son needed to steal from his wife to feel like a man. Eleanor opened her mouth to reply, but I held up my hand. No, I don't want to hear any more. You have all had 38 years to treat me with respect, and you chose not to. Now it's too late. I walked to the door and opened it wide. I want you to leave my house. All of you, now. Charles stood up, indignant. Emily, you can't just throw us out like we're strangers. We're family. No, I replied with a calm that came from some deep place I didn't know existed. You are Mark's family. I am no longer part of that family. And frankly, it's the best gift I've given myself in decades. They left one by one, muttering among themselves, casting looks of reproach and disbelief at me. Mark was the last to leave, pausing on the threshold as if he expected me to change my mind at the last second. Emily, he whispered, this isn't you. You're not cruel. You're right, I answered. This isn't me. This is me defending myself. This is me valuing myself. This is me choosing my own happiness over your comfort. What if I regret this? What if I really want to come back to you? I looked at him one last time, this man who had been my world for nearly 4 decades, and I felt nothing. Not love, not hate, not pain, just a quiet void where my devotion used to be. Mark, I said softly, a week ago that question would have made me cry with hope. Today it just makes me feel pity. Pity for you, for having lost the only woman who ever loved you unconditionally. And pity for me, for taking 63 years to realize I deserved better. I closed the door and engaged all the locks. For the first time in my life, my home was completely mine, free of invaders, free of demands, free of people who confused love with servitude. I stood there, leaning against the door, waiting to feel sadness or remorse. But all I felt was a deep and complete peace. The old Emily had died that afternoon. In her place, a woman had been born who was still discovering who she was, but who already knew one thing for sure. She would never again allow anyone to treat her as if she were worth anything less. 2 weeks after the final confrontation, I woke up one morning and didn't recognize my own reflection in the bathroom mirror. Not because I had changed physically in any drastic way, but because the woman looking back at me had something in her eyes I hadn't seen in decades. Hope. I had slept for 11 hours straight. Something unthinkable during my marriage, when the slightest sound of Mark coming home late would jolt me awake with a start that took hours to subside. Now, the silence of my apartment wasn't the echo of loneliness, but the soundtrack of peace. That morning I made a decision that would have terrified the Emily of a month ago. I was going to change everything that reminded me of the life I had just left behind. I started with the bedroom. I dragged the king-sized mattress to the building's trash compactor, hauling it down the service stairs with a satisfaction that bordered on euphoria. The neighbors looked at me with curiosity, but I no longer cared what they thought. The bed where I had slept next to a liar for nearly 4 decades needed to disappear from my life. At a furniture store on the Upper West Side, I took my time choosing a perfect twin bed, a white wrought iron frame, a firm but comfortable mattress, and bedding in shades of blue that I had always loved, but that Mark considered too feminine for a marital bedroom. Is this for a guest room? The young saleswoman asked with a kind smile. No, I replied, feeling the words fill me with pride. It's for me, for my bedroom. The girl didn't ask any more questions, but something in her eyes told me she understood. Maybe she too had had to rebuild her life from scratch at some point. When they came to install the bed, I completely transformed the bedroom. I moved the furniture so the bed was next to the window, where I could see the sunrise every morning. I took all of Mark's ties and suits out of the closet and donated them to Goodwill, keeping only the empty hangers as symbols of the infinite possibilities I now had to fill that space. I hung pictures on the walls that I had kept in storage because Mark didn't like them. Watercolor landscapes of the New England coast I had bought at a street fair years ago. Portraits of my parents that made me smile every time I saw them. Even an antique gold-framed mirror I had inherited from my grandmother that he considered tacky. For the first time in decades, my bedroom looked like me. The next project was the kitchen. For years, it had been organized according to Mark's culinary tastes. The spices he preferred on the most accessible shelves, the utensils he used for his Sunday omelets in the main drawer. Even the coffee maker programmed to brew coffee exactly how he liked it. I reorganized everything according to my own preferences. I bought spices I had never used because Mark considered them too exotic. Cardamom, black cumin, sumac, za'atar. I acquired baking tools I had avoided buying because he thought baking was a waste of time when you can just buy something from the bakery. My first creation was a lemon and poppy seed loaf, following a recipe I had saved in a drawer for years. The scent that filled the apartment as it baked was the aroma of freedom. Sweet, warm, completely mine. When it was ready, I cut a generous slice and ate it right from the pan, standing in the kitchen, savoring every bite as if it were the first time I had tasted something made with my own hands for my own pleasure. A week later, I accepted Carmen's offer to go back to work at the flower shop. Not because I needed the money, but because I had missed the feeling of creating something beautiful with my hands, of seeing a bride smile when I handed her the perfect bouquet, of being part of the most important celebrations in other people's lives. On my first day back, I wore a dress I had bought during my mall visit, navy blue with small white flowers, fitted at the waist, which made me feel feminine without being flashy. I put my hair up in a soft bun and applied a little makeup, not to impress anyone, but because I liked how I looked in the mirror. "Emily!" Carmen greeted me with a hug that reminded me what it was like to have real friends. "You look radiant. You look different." "I feel different," I admitted, breathing in the familiar scent of roses, carnations, and gerbera daisies that filled the shop with life and color. Working with flowers gave me back something I didn't know I had lost. A connection to simple, natural beauty. Every bouquet I arranged was a small work of art. Every funeral wreath was an act of love for someone who was gone. Every centerpiece was the promise of a celebration that would brighten a family's life. During our lunch break, Carmen and I sat in the back room with sandwiches and coffee, talking in a way I hadn't talked with anyone in years. "Emily," Carmen said, watching me curiously, "I know this is personal, but how are you really feeling? With the divorce, with all the changes?" The question took me by surprise, not because it was intrusive, but because I realized no one had asked me how I felt during this whole crisis. Everyone had wanted to know how Mark felt, how it was affecting the family, how the situation could be fixed, but no one had shown genuine interest in my emotional well-being. "I feel like I've been holding my breath for decades and I can finally exhale," I said, surprised by my own honesty. "It's terrifying and liberating at the same time." Carmen nodded in understanding. "You know what?" she said. "My sister went through something similar 5 years ago. Her husband wasn't cheating, but he treated her like she was invisible. When they divorced, we all thought she would fall apart. Instead, she became the happiest version of herself we had ever seen. How is she now? Backpacking through Europe, sending us pictures from places she'd always dreamed of visiting. At 68, Emily. At 68, she decided it was never too late to live her dreams. That night, after work, I did something I hadn't done in my entire adult life. I went to the movies alone. I chose a French romantic comedy that I knew Mark would have hated, bought a large popcorn even though it was just for me, and sat in a center seat where I could see the screen perfectly. For 2 hours, I immersed myself in a love story that had nothing to do with sacrifice or renunciation, but with two people who met and chose each other freely, without family drama, financial manipulation, or lies. It was fiction, I knew, but it reminded me that true love didn't have to hurt. Leaving the theater, I walked slowly home through Central Park. It was a warm, early summer evening, and the park was full of people strolling, young couples holding hands, families with children running through the trees, elderly people sitting on benches sharing stories of a lifetime. I sat on my favorite bench, the one near the lake at Bethesda Terrace, and watched the life unfolding around me. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel excluded from that normal, happy life. I felt part of it, entitled to be there, to enjoy the beauty of a New York evening without having to justify my presence to anyone. I took out my phone and, on an impulse, searched for flights to Paris. The postcard I had found in my kitchen weeks ago was still on my refrigerator, a daily reminder of the dreams I had postponed for too long. The prices weren't prohibitive. The dates were flexible. The hotels had rooms available. There were no valid excuses not to go, except for fear. And fear, I realized, no longer had power over me. I booked a flight for the following month, Paris in July. 4 days and 3 nights in the city I had dreamed of visiting since I was a 20-year-old girl, with a head full of romanticism, and a heart open to all possibilities. When I got home that night, instead of feeling the weight of loneliness, I felt the lightness of independence. I didn't have to report my movements to anyone, justify my expenses, or negotiate my decisions with someone who would have criticized or sabotaged them. I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine Mark used to save for special occasions that never came, put classical music on the stereo, and sat in my favorite armchair with my legs tucked under me, just like I used to when I was a child. In my planner, I wrote, Paris, July 15th, 18, Emily's first adventure. For the first time in my life, the future wasn't something I feared. It was something I was excited about. Emily was learning to live, not just to survive, and she was discovering she liked it much more than she had ever imagined. 6 months later, I am sitting in a cafe along the Seine, watching the golden afternoon sun reflect on the waters of the river I had dreamed of seeing for so many years. My second café au lait is slowly cooling as I write in a journal I bought in a small stationery shop in the Latin Quarter. This is my third trip to Paris this year, but the first where I feel completely at home with myself. The woman who wrote that first desperate entry 6 months ago seems like a stranger now. I reread those pages last night in my hotel room, and I could hardly recognize the Emily who blamed herself for not being enough for a man who was stealing her life while she apologized for existing. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago. Mark had to pay back most of the money he had spent, selling the Soho apartment, the jewelry, even the Mercedes he loved so much. His 4 mistresses miraculously disappeared when they discovered their generous benefactor was broke and facing charges of marital fraud. The last I heard of him was from Carmen at the flower shop, who saw him working as a salesman at an electronics store in the suburbs. He had aged 10 years in 6 months, she said, and had the look of someone who had finally understood the real price of his decisions. I didn't feel pity for him, nor did I feel vengeful satisfaction, just a profound indifference, like one feels for a stranger whose story doesn't affect you. And that indifference was my final liberation. The moment I realized Mark no longer had any power over my emotions, positive or negative. In these past months, I have discovered versions of myself I never knew existed. The Emily who travels alone and sits in Parisian cafes to write her thoughts. The Emily who takes an Italian cooking class on Thursday afternoons because she enjoys learning to make fresh pasta. The Emily who joined a book club where she discusses novels with women her age who are also rediscovering who they are after decades of being someone else's wife. The Emily who a month ago met Michael. Michael is a widower, 65, and he sells antique books at a stall at the Brooklyn Flea that I visit every Sunday. It's not a movie romance. There are no violins in the background or promises of eternal love. It's something much better. A friendship that has grown into affection, based on mutual respect and genuine admiration. Michael listens to me when I talk. He really listens, not just waiting for his turn to speak, but paying attention to what I say, as if my words have real value. He asks about my opinions, my dreams, my future plans, as if I were an interesting person rather than a decorative accessory in someone else's life. Last week, he invited me to join him on a trip upstate to the Hudson Valley to visit an antique book fair. We went in his car, listening to classical music and talking about everything and nothing, stopping in little towns for coffee and donuts. At the end of the day, when he walked me to my door, he gave me a soft kiss on the cheek and said, "Thank you for a perfect day, Emily." For the first time in my adult life, a man thanked me for my company instead of taking it for granted. I don't know if Michael and I will build something lasting. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But I've learned that love doesn't have to be desperate to be real. It doesn't have to hurt to be deep. It doesn't have to control you to be true. The flower shop has become more than a job. It's my second home. Carmen and I have developed a friendship that goes far beyond employer-employee. We have lunch together, go to the theater, and laugh at silly things like teenagers. She has taught me that female friendship can be a life raft when everything else falls apart. Last month, a woman in her 50s came into the shop, clearly distressed. She wanted flowers for the funeral of her marriage, she told me with a bitter smile. Her husband had left her for a younger woman after 25 years, taking half their savings and leaving her feeling invisible and useless. I listened to her as I arranged a bouquet of pink peonies, And in her story, I recognized my own from 6 months ago. I told her about Monica, my lawyer. I recommended the book club. I told her that betrayal hurts, but it's not the end of her story. It's the beginning of a new chapter that she can write exactly as she wants. She left with her flowers and my phone number. Last week, she sent me a photo from Savannah, where she had gone to visit a cousin she hadn't seen in years. In the photo, she was smiling genuinely for the first time in months, surrounded by Spanish moss with her hair blowing in the wind. "Thank you for reminding me that I'm more than just someone's wife," her message read. And in that moment, I understood my purpose now, to help other women remember who they are when they stop being just shadows of other people. I've thought about writing a book about my experience, not a self-help manual full of cliches, but the real story of how a 63-year-old woman discovered it's never too late to choose your own happiness over someone else's comfort. My home now reflects who I really am. The walls are filled with photos from my travels, paintings I love regardless of whether anyone else finds them appropriate. Plants I care for because I enjoy watching them grow. The fridge is stocked with ingredients for recipes I want to try, not the food someone else expects to find when they get home. On Sunday mornings, I stay in bed reading novels until 11, in no rush to get up and make breakfast for anyone but myself. On Friday nights, I go to the movies or the theater with Carmen, or just stay home with a glass of wine and a good film, without having to negotiate what to watch or when. My savings, the ones Mark couldn't touch, I'm spending on enriching experiences, art classes, travel, dinners at restaurants I've always wanted to try, clothes I like regardless of whether they're age-appropriate. Because I've learned that money saved for a future that never arrives is money wasted. Mark's family disappeared from my life as if they had never existed. Not one call, not one letter, not one text asking how I am. Their silence confirmed what I already suspected. They never saw me as a real person, but as a useful accessory in the life of their son and brother. And that's okay. Their absence has made room for authentic relationships with people who value me for who I am, not for what I can do for them. Yesterday, while walking through the Luxembourg Gardens, watching young couples take pictures by the statues, I realized something surprising. I don't feel envy. I don't miss being young. I don't regret the lost time, because this is my time. The 63-year-old woman I am now has a depth, a wisdom, a freedom that the 20-year-old girl did not have. I have paid the price for experience, and now I get to enjoy its benefits. This afternoon I will fly back to New York, but I am already planning my next trip. Maybe Italy in the fall, or perhaps it's time to see Morocco, where the spices I use in my kitchen come to life in the markets of Marrakesh. The future is a blank canvas that I can paint exactly as I want, without having to consult anyone else about the colors I choose. As I finish my coffee and watch Paris awaken to a new afternoon, I think of the Emily I was 6 months ago, scared, broken, convinced that her life was over at 63. She had no idea it was just beginning. The real Emily, the one who had been dormant for decades, had finally woken up, and she turned out to be exactly the woman she had always wanted to be. I close my journal, pay for my coffee, and walk to the metro that will take me back to my hotel. Tomorrow will be another day in my new life, filled with possibilities that no longer scare me but excite me, because I have learned the most important lesson of all. The love they never gave me, I can give to myself. And that self-love is the one thing no one can ever take away. And you who have followed me on this journey, have you ever experienced anything like this? Do you know someone who sacrificed their happiness to keep someone else comfortable? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because maybe this message will reach exactly who needs to hear it today. Sometimes, what we think is the end of our story is simply the beginning of the most beautiful chapter we could ever have imagined writing.